Hi, my name is Marbella Sanchez, and here is my literary lens presentation. The parallel lives of Frankenstein and Douglas. The lens that I chose is the race conscious lens. I couldn't find a set definition for it, but I did base the definition that I did write on an article on race conscious policy making, and I was able to get a good picture of it. And basically, what this lens does is acknowledges and addresses the impact of race and racism on individuals and society. It recognizes the barriers that have been imposed onto minority groups either by society, social constructs, or others. This literary lens reflects the racial inequality in how characters are shaped, judged, or excluded based on their race and outward appearance. Here are some key concepts. I use these key concepts to guide my analysis of the readings. The concepts are race, marginalization, otherness, and social exclusion. And if you couldn't tell by the title, the readings that I chose are Frankenstein and Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. Why these readings? Well, although Frankenstein and the Narrative of Frederick Douglass are quite contrasting due to one being fictional with an actual monstrous looking being, and the other a real-life account of a man born into slavery, both do manifest many of the key concepts of the race-conscious lens. While only one may deal with the concept of race, the reanimation is still different than others and treated as such, but both deal with marginalization, otherness, and social exclusion. In the societies in both of these pieces of literature are not able to see the marginalized as humans or living beings, but as dangerous beasts, property, and as inferiors. This mistreatment has a deep impact on each of the characters and ultimately shapes who they are, their choices, and their understanding of the world around them. Analysis of Frankenstein. Frankenstein, from the very beginning, he experienced prejudice and bias and mistreatment from his maker, Victor Frankenstein. He immediately rejected the reanimation upon looking at it without giving it a chance to know his true intentions, emotions, or thoughts. He ultimately decided to run away because of the monster-like appearance of the creature that awoke. Here's a quote to support that. A mummy, again endued with animation, could not be so hideous as that wretch. He's referring to to the reanimation here. When the monster, quote, is left to fend for itself, he seeks companionship of people who are willing to provide the closeness of a family. He had good intentions with people. He would chop wood for the DeLacy family, learn the language of man, all in hopes of forming a personal connection with the family. In fact, he felt empathy for the family when they were suffering, but they still rejected him for his outward appearance. Here's a quote to support that. Felix darted forward, and with supernatural force tore me from his father, to whose knees I clung. In a transport of fury, he dashed me to the ground and struck me violently with the stick. He wasn't doing anything to the grandpa. He just wanted companionship and friend. That's all that he was looking for. But he wasn't an actual threat. But Felix, because of his appearance, saw it as such. So, yeah. And here's a continued analysis. Here are the key themes that I use as a guide. Marginalization. Due to his monster-like appearance, the creature is pushed into isolation, living alone, hiding from humans, and in fear. He is not given a chance, but immediately judged when he is seen, even if he was just seeking friendship or saving someone's life. He is forced to be in the outskirts of society. Even the reanimation himself says that living alone is much better than with humans. And here's a quote. They spurn and hate me. The desert mountains and dreary glaciers are my refuge. Otherness. While the reanimation was actually monstrous looking or different due to Victor Frankenstein making him giant and superior in build than humans, he does hold the good qualities that some people have, such as compassion, a need for companionship, and deep feelings. but society is only able to see his outward appearance and viewed him as dangerous and not a friend to humans. He's always had good intentions. Anyway, here's the last key concept of the analysis of Frankenstein: social exclusion. Because the reanimation was rejected from the very beginning by everyone, including his maker, he is left to figure out the ways of society, their language, and ultimately never learns how to make connections properly due to the lack of introduction to man and society. He learns what he can by secretly observing the family, the DeLacy family. That's how he learned how to speak. Understand what they were saying. Here's a conclusion. Whether the marginalization, social exclusion, and sense of otherness caused the reanimation, the creature does start off with hope and kindness toward humanity, longing for their connection and acceptance. However, as he is constantly rejected by his maker, villagers, and most of society, he becomes bitter, vengeful, and murderous. This is when he decides to kill the loved ones of Victor Frankenstein one by one. While the reanimation's actions are not excusable, they are shaped by the prejudices and fear that is felt toward him. No one in society could afford to take a second to acknowledge that maybe the creature was not a monster but a misjudged being. They left him without dignity, identity, humanity, and isolated him from the rest of humanity. So he became what people here feared he was: a monster. Here's a powerful quote that goes with this conclusion: I am malicious because I am miserable, and people in the society that he lives in is the cause of his maliciousness, although it's not excusable. So this rejection mirrors how society will often fear and exclude others based on visible appearances, misjudgment, and prejudice, without having an understanding of them, and that perhaps they are like them internally and emotionally, while still different on the outside. Okay, here's the analysis of Frederick Douglass. In his narrative, him and other slaves experienced a lot of racial oppression. From the beginning of the narrative, Frederick Douglass explains how the whites would not allow the enslaved to have any knowledge of their age or attend school, just like the white children did. This was meant to keep them isolated with no sense of identity and simple-minded. This way, they might stay submissive to their masters. Here's a quote for that. To support that, by far the larger part of the slaves know as little as their ages as horses know of theirs, and it is the wish of most masters within my knowledge to keep their slaves thus ignorant. Douglass at the time of his enslavement was separated from his mother at a very young age and did not truly know if his white master was his father or not, meaning that he truly had no sense of identity, emotional connection, or any personal history. The enslavers would break any familial bonds by separating families, ultimately treating humans as livestock or even property. And here's a quote to go with that. My mother and I were separated when I was an infant, before I knew her as my mother. And even when she passes away, he says that he felt no true emotion. It was as if she was a stranger to him because of the separation from an early age. So yeah. Okay, here are the key themes in Frederick Douglass. Marginalization. The slavery system during this time was set up to separate, sell, and profit off of African Americans. He was denied having any sense of community as he was separated from his mother, did not exactly know what his parentage was, and was also denied from visiting his sick mother. He and others had no place in society during this time, as they were dealt with whatever manner slaveholders pleased, as well as the government who allowed the system. Here is a quote for that. not allowed to be present during her illness, at her death, or burial. He was denied by his master. Otherness. Frederick Douglass is seen as property during his time as an enslaved person, especially when he is sent to Mr. Covey, the slave breaker, as he was sent with him to crush his spirit and make him more submissive to his master, Thomas Auld. There he is beaten brutally. He is seen as a subhuman that needs to remain compliant to his master. Here's a powerful quote for that. Mr. Covey succeeded in breaking me. I was broken in body, soul, and spirit. My natural elasticity was crushed. My intellect languished. The disposition to read departed. The cheerful spark that lingered about my eye died. The dark night of slavery closed in upon me, and behold, a man transformed me into a brute. Exactly what they wanted. Social exclusion. Douglass, as well as many other slaves, were kept out of the loop of education and literacy, something that is very essential in their time as the abolition movement was starting. Without these tools, he could not fully grasp the injustice that he was living in until he gained the knowledge of these to do so, which is why his slaveholder prohibited his wife from teaching him how to read and write. They knew that literacy would allow the slave to gain autonomy. Here's a quote for that. Learning would spoil the best slave in the world. Now, said he, if you teach that slave, speaking of myself, how to read, there would be no keeping him. Okay, here's the conclusion, and it's quite different than the reanimation, who retaliated in a violent manner, but he used it to get out of his situation and help others. While Frederick Douglass did live through a lot of hardship, being separated from his mother at a young age, being sold off from master to master, witnessing cruel beatings of others as well as beatings of his own, he used all of this to go against the system and learn how to read and write by challenging children. Not only that, but he began to stand up against slaveholders, such as Mr. Covey, who never beat him again. Through this, he gained freedom and understanding of his unjustified situation and ultimately escaped it and became his own master. Not only did he help himself out of the situation, but he helped others by writing his own autobiography and humanized the marginalized who were only seen as property. His situation reflects how in a society built on racial inequality, people of different race, origin, and color were denied autonomy, connection, dignity, and humanity. Nonetheless, Frederick Douglass used these drawbacks to help himself and others in the same situation. Here's a quote to go with the first part of the conclusion. I will give Mr. Freeland the credit of being the best master I ever had, till I became my own master. That's great. Here are comparisons between the two readings, Frankenstein and the narrative of Frederick Douglass. As Frankenstein created his reanimation, we could see how the creature is only viewed as an accomplishment and scientific glory that his maker is sought after. He could not see him as a living and breathing creature, but as a trophy. Same thing with Frederick Douglass, who was handed from master to master, only being seen as a praised property. Here's two quotes to go with each reading. A new species would bless me as its creator and source. Many happy and excellent natures would owe their being to me. That's from Frankenstein. It is a common custom in the part of Maryland from which I ran away to part children from their mothers at a very early age. Meaning that slaveholders did whatever they wanted, even they separated families. So yeah. And both characters are denied literacy by different circumstances, the creature by rejection, and Douglass to keep him compliant to his master. Here's the first quote to go with that. While I improved in speech, I also learned the science of letters as it was taught to a stranger. And this opened before me a wide field for wonder and delight. That's Frankenstein. Mr. Auld found what was going on, and at once forbade Mrs. Auld to instruct me further, telling her, among other things, that it was lawful as well as unsafe to teach the slave to read. That's from Douglas's narrative. And here's a reflection. Looking at Frankenstein, a narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave, through the race-conscious lens, allows one to notice the topic of race and racism within these pieces of literature, even if it does not necessarily talk about race or even humans. Both pieces of literature deal with the similar topics of being considered subhuman, excluded from society, and even perceived in negative ways. This lens highlights how both the creature and Douglas are shaped by the system and attitudes that deny them the right of basic humanity, as well as tools that could grant them what they need and want, such as human connection and becoming master of oneself. Thank you. That is all. Here's the works cited page.